I'm your host, Aaron Heath, and I'd like to take a moment to thank you for downloading, subscribing, and most importantly, listening to episode 28 of the Gun Rights in Texas podcast. Now, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, I downloaded what I thought was the Open Carry Report. And if I hadn't changed the name and rebranded and repurposed the podcast, you would be listening to episode 28 of the Open Carry Report. However, things change and the podcast changed. Now, with that said, we do have an email from Myra, kind of a long email. I'm going to read over it and summarize it because this thing just came in as I was getting set up to record this episode. Myra writes that Open Carry Texas has their podcast. Yeah, I'm aware of that. And they did episode 3 on Thursday, and I'm recording this late Friday evening. Okay, going on. Audio is choppy, should bury the hatchet and help OCT with their audio problems. Yeah, I'm going to say that I'm not really going to help OCT unless they ask for it. I'm a man of my word. I told CJ when he started his podcast effort long ago, I told him, hey, I'll help you out. And I will still honor that. But I'm not going to go and offer to help him because of the issues we have. And some of those issues led to the rebranding of this podcast. So, Myra, I apologize that I'm not going to go help them. Looks like you suggested they get help from the Gun Dudes and the Squirrel Report. Both good podcasts. And I really do like both shows. So, yeah, we're not going to really be all that interested in helping OCT. If they ask for help, I'll help them. But maybe they can hit up the Gun Dudes or the Squirrel Report like you said you suggested, and they'll help them. Now, I listen to both those shows, and I like them. In fact, I didn't know about the Squirrel Report really until, when was it? I want to say I listened to them before, but then I kind of lost where I was listening to them. And then somebody emailed me that they referenced the Open Carry Report, and I started listening to them again. So I really like the Squirrel Report. If you're into gun rights or shooting in general, you really do need to listen to the Gun Dudes. I'm sorry about suggesting the mental insanity of the Gun Dudes, but it's a good insanity. It's a fun insanity. Listen to the Gun Dudes and you'll understand. Now, one thing I left off is if you want to find the show notes for this episode, go to gunrightsintexas.com/028. Now, I want to play a little audio clip that in the past would have been part of the sign-off music for the Open Carry Report, but since we're doing a new podcast, or not a new podcast, I rebranded and reformatted and all this other stuff on the Open Carry Report, as it is now known as Gun Rights in Texas. Changes happen, and one of those changes you're about to hear. The Gun Rights in Texas podcast is available on iTunes, on Stitcher, and in the Microsoft Windows podcast store. Of course, you can always download the show and see the show notes as well as comment by going to the website gunrightsintexas.com. Now, one thing I do want to touch on before I go any further is I'm going to take the audio that you're hearing right now and I'm going to throw it with the cover art from the podcast and make a video. I'm going to upload that video to YouTube where people can download, or not download, but go there and watch it. And by watch it, I mean just listen to it in another tab or something, because you're not going to have to put up with seeing my face because I have a face made for radio. Well, let's get on to the actual discussion that we need to touch on before we move on to the topic. And one of the things I want to touch on here is, like I said, I'm rebranding, renaming, and basically redoing the podcast. Episodes 1 through 27 are going to be the Open Carry Report. Episode 28, which is what you're listening to, and onward, are going to be known as Gun Rights in Texas. Now, Gun Rights in Texas is a whole different animal than the Open Carry Report. At the same time, they're one and the same. Basically, everything is building off of the old material. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what we did. I dislike what had happened with it, But who knows? Rebranding should be interesting. The new content, the new topics, that should make it interesting. So let's play one more audio clip since I kind of got out of sequence here, and we'll move on to the topic. The Gun Rights in Texas podcast is available on social media. Links to all the social media profiles can be found on the website. On Twitter, the podcast is @GunRightsNTX. On Facebook and Google+, it is Gun Rights in Texas. So please, be social. All right, now you know how to be social with us, and you know how to get the show. With that said, let's bring up our topic. And our topic's basically going to be, why did I rebrand and change up the show? I figure an explanation is in order, so I'm going to give it to you. And that's basically what this episode's going to be. Now, it is amazingly difficult to get a good quality guest. I mean, you're having to work out your schedule with theirs. You have to make sure that you're not going to do or say anything that makes them look like a fool or makes them look bad. Because if you do, you won't get them back on as a guest, and you won't get other guests because you'll develop a reputation as being, well, harmful to your guest. And it becomes even more difficult to get these good quality guests when you're being viewed as somehow associated with a group or person that the guest or potential guest does not want to be associated with themselves. And you may be wondering, how does that come into play? Well, thanks to the in-your-face tactics and the antics of groups like Open Carry Texas, and it's not just Open Carry Texas, there's Open Carry Tarrant County and others, but Open Carry Texas applies to this podcast because of the similarity in the name, or the old name and Open Carry Texas name. Now, because of Open Carry Texas, the words Texas, open, and carry are toxic when you mix them together in a discussion. Many potential guests have flat out stated they wanted nothing to do with anything associated with OCT, and because the Open Carry Report's name was similar to Open Carry Texas, and the Open Carry Report was unapologetically geared towards Texas politics, they assumed that OCT had something to do with the show. Never mind the fact that I was far more sane and not going out there and trying to sabotage our chances with passing Open Carry or sabotage our chances of passing Open Carry by doing things that just were too far out there and too in your face. Well, a few of these people would be willing to work with me after I convinced them OCT not only had nothing to do with the show, but actually didn't get along with me because of the differences we have experienced, especially as of late. Some of the guests just simply said, yeah, you're too similar to OCT based on the name, and we don't want anything, no matter how remotely linked to OCT, being associated with us. And some just simply refused to communicate with me at all. And some guests would take a lot of work, but I could get them to go ahead and come on. The problem is that when you have a group that's poisoning the waters as badly as OCT is, and you're trying to get guests on that have reputations as being well-grounded, and they're wanting to get, they got political reputations, they have media reputations, and they have these reputations, and they're trying to push an agenda of their own, which is advancing gun rights in most cases. But still, their reputation is everything, and they don't want to risk that reputation by being associated with someone or something that is using in-your-face tactics or being as offensive as they can be in some cases. So guests were a big factor in rebranding the podcast. Another thing about it is, with the rebranding, renaming, and repurposing of the podcast, I can now cover more topics. As an Open Carry podcast, the Open Carry Report was limited to the topics of Open Carry, and Open Carry. That's right. That was the three topics that the Open Carry Report could cover. All three of them were Open Carry. Now, you can cover Open Carry, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. But at a certain point, covering Open Carry becomes, shall we say, boring, and you can only cover something so much before the audience turns away from you. Well, we hadn't reached that point, but I felt it was coming on. I felt it was getting close. So with that said, the open carry report its downloads were doing steady, going up slightly, not as much as I would like, but they were growing, and the podcast was still advancing, but I knew that the antics of OCT and others were hurting the show, and the topics had to change. If I wanted to distance myself from OCT, I'd have to change the topics. So I had to find new topics, and I figured, well, why not just be a general gun rights podcast and cover everything? This way I don't go off topic when something pops up that I feel needs to be addressed, but it's not open carry related. So I have a choice. I don't have to worry about choosing between go off topic for an episode or ignore it. I could have gone off topic. I really could have. And the Getting the Message Out episode where I had my friend on, that was a pretty good example of going off topic. However, I don't like going off topic. I like to stay on topic, get the message out, and not pollute the issue. Now, by being a general gun rights podcast, I have the whole realm available to me. But that's a lot more material than I really need. So, when something comes up, I can still address it, but I can still niche down. And that leads me into what I wanted to niche down into, which is the state of Texas. A major aspect to the rebranding, renaming, and repurposing of the podcast was the ability to focus on issues that relate to Texas alone. Now, there are national issues that the show will have to touch on because they affect Texans, and of course, there are the state and local issues that we will also touch on the show. Issues in other states I don't intend to cover unless they have some value that is intrinsic to Texas. So what would be a value to Texas? Well, there's a relationship to Texas with it, or there's a lesson that we can learn here in Texas from it, or maybe Texas residents have an interest in this issue. Kind of like when New Mexico dropped reciprocity with Texas, or at least some reciprocity. That is an issue that, while it was an out-of-state issue, it had an interest to Texas residents because it could affect them. And finally, if an issue has an effect on Texas residents or Texas, we'll touch on it. But in the end, this podcast is now about Texas gun rights, and that's about it. And I have to say it's a good thing because the changes to this podcast could not have come sooner. It seems Open Carry Texas has developed a sudden fascination with deadly shootings. I'll give you two examples that kind of brought this to my attention. In Houston, there's a bar called EJ's Place. There was a shooting there where a patron was illegally carrying, and he shot and killed 2 out of 4 robbery suspects. Once he had shot and killed them, he fled the scene. Now, OCT posted on Facebook they hoped the patron was never caught, which isn't a good thing to post if you're trying to advance, gun rights, because now you're being viewed as a criminal sympathizer. And then the second case is where OCT posted, if you hit the right spot, you only have to replace 1 bullet, and the perp will drop like a rock immediately and automatically assume a position that makes it easier to stuff them in a coffin. There is so much wrong with that statement. First off, replacing only 1 bullet. Odds are that while you may have to replace only 1 bullet, you're going to be without the bullets and that are in the gun and the gun for quite a while. Unless, of course, you take a page from the EJ Place's shooter and run away with your gun, in which case you're committing a felony. However, it goes on with the part about being able to stuff them into a coffin. And basically, it looks to me from that statement, OCT is advocating vigilante justice. And you can't have that. If you're trying to push gun rights, you cannot be seen as a vigilante organization or a criminal sympathizing organization. And we'll touch on the EJ's Place shooting later in the news. However, statements like these, no matter how heartfelt they are, do not help promote gun rights, and they have a detrimental effect on the efforts to gain ground for gun rights. Our opponents will take these statements, if OCT actually has any political credibility left when the legislative session starts. Our political opponents will take these statements and they'll go to the various politicians, say, look, OCT wants to sympathize with criminals while at the same time they're wanting to call for vigilante justice. And they'll draw this pretty little connect the dots map, and our politicians, some of them, will jump on the bandwagon and attack OCT with what little credibility OCT has left. But at the same time, they'll attack anything associated with OCT, including gun rights. Now, earlier you heard the part about the social media and all that, but you may be curious as to some of the things that we've changed here at the podcast. Well, with the rebranding, repurposing, and renaming, some essential changes had to be made to our social media. I keep adding an H sound in there. I don't know why. But some essential changes had to be made to our social media to take full advantage of the changes to the show. Now, all the social media accounts have changed somewhat. A new email address was created, although the old email address still works, and we will respond to email sent there, or I will respond to email sent there. So let's start talking about the changes with the email address. If you want to send email to Gun Rights in Texas, send it to aaron@gunrightstintexas.com. On Facebook, the URL did change. It's now facebook.com/gunrightstintexas. On Twitter, the show is @GunRightsNTX. Ran out of room. I think it would be like Tex8 would be the name if I tried to spell out Texas. And on Google+, the show is searchable under Gun Rights in Texas. The biggest advantage to doing the show like we are is that the podcast becomes more flexible. And I'm going to start doing more on social media, or I hope I can. I'm very busy with work and life and all that, but I plan to do more relating to social media and try to get the message out there better. And one of the things I want to talk about with changing the show is, what can we do to advance gun rights in Texas? There are two real easy things you can do. First off, you can join the NRA. By joining the NRA, you're adding money to the war chest, and more importantly, you're adding to the numbers of members. If you are a member of the NRA, consider donating to them to add more money to the war chest, or sign up your friends. Give them a membership as a gift. Sign up your children because you need to teach them the responsibility of being a gun owner. And another thing you can do is very similar to joining the NRA, and that is join the TSRA. Joining the TSRA is a critical thing to consider doing. Some people might say, well, the TSRA isn't the NRA. And that's right, they're not. The NRA works more on national issues. They do help out on the state level issues, but their state level rep covers more than just Texas. The state level rep, and I think Texas is the only one that actually has their state level rep that lives in the state, but the state level rep covers for us. I know she covers Texas and Louisiana, and there may be other states she has to cover as well. So when our legislature is in session, she may be working here, and then she may be on the plane the next day working in Louisiana, and she's on the plane flying somewhere else or flying back to Texas or whatever the next day. The thing is, she's having to split her time. And when something pops up in the legislature that requires an immediate response and she's out of state, they may or may not be able to call her because she may be in the middle of a very similar conversation with other legislators in another state. So what happens? They turn to the Texas State Rifle Association rep, and that would be Alice Tripp. We have had Alice on the Open Carry Report along with Charles Cotton, and I'll be honest, Alice is one of those people. She has impressed upon me significant portions of her personality where she reminds me of a teacher I had in high school. And I'll be honest, I respect Alice far more than I thought I could respect somebody that I hardly knew. I mean, I've had basically 2 conversations with the lady, and she's probably in the top 25 people that I respect. Part of that is because she has a record I can go back and look at. I can see what she has done. I can see what she has accomplished, and I have a pretty good idea of where she's trying to go just by looking at that record. The conversations I've had with her, I had a conversation with her leading up to the roundtable in episode 10, and then we had the discussion in the roundtable on episode 10. Those 2 discussions have opened up the window to her personality far more than I had imagined. She, like I said, she reminds me of one of my favorite teachers in high school, and she has my respect. So if you want to help gun rights in Texas, you can join the NRA, you can join the TSRA. If you're already a member, you can donate money, or if you're not a member, you can still donate money to them. And in all honesty, that's really what I think we should do, is we should really push the TSRA and the NRA memberships so that both organizations have more power when it comes to the legislative agenda. You know what? We're starting to go off topic, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to play the little audio clip for the contact info, and we'll move on and go to the news. If you want to contact the podcast, please send email to aaron@gunrightsintexas.com, or you can leave a comment on the webpage, which is gunrightsintexas.com. However, if you want to leave a voicemail and be featured on the show, then please do so by dialing 409-292-6736. Now, in our news, we're going to have a couple of different categories that we're going to try to put stories into, and I may keep that or I may get rid of it. So our first story comes to us where, and this is a story I mentioned earlier, where many people have heard about it, and this is the shooting at the Texas bar known as EJ's Place in Houston. Well, in this shooting, a patron of the bar shot and killed 2 out of 4 armed suspects who were attempting to rob the bar. Now, what is known, even though we don't know who the patron was, what is known is that he was carrying illegally, even if he had a concealed handgun license, because basically it's a felony to carry it's a felony for the public to carry in an establishment where 51% or more of the revenue comes from the sale of alcoholic beverages for on-premises consumption. And when he fled the scene, he committed another felony. Had he remained at the scene, he could have used a necessity defense on the unlawful carry charge and gotten off scot-free, I suspect. However, now he's facing at least 1, possibly 2 felony charges that he could have avoided. Now, in Kilgore, Texas, Fire Marshal Brandon Bigos shot what appeared to be an intoxicated suspect who was armed with an AR-15, and he was acting in a threatening manner towards firefighters at the scene. The suspect was taken to the hospital and later released, at which time he was arrested on a warrant relating to the event that led to him getting shot. Texas Rangers investigated the incident, and Fire Marshal Bigos has since been reinstated so that he can resume his duties. Now, some people may be thinking, what's a fire marshal doing shooting somebody? Well, in Texas, a fire marshal is a sworn law enforcement officer. And being a sworn law enforcement officer, he has to meet certain standards and certain requirements. And those standards and requirements allow him to carry a firearm in the course of his duties as long as he maintains those certifications. So there you go. He's a sworn law enforcement officer. He was involved in a shooting. Therefore, in Texas, the event had to be investigated by Texas Rangers. Now, our next category, and that category that those stories were coming from, was pretty much the in defense of self and others category. But we do have another category I'm going to touch on, and this one I've got 3 stories in it, and it's called the crime report. And this one gets interesting with the first story right off the bat. Now, in Fort Worth, Deputy Police Chief Kenneth Flynn was arrested on a charge of cruelty to an animal. The incident in question relates to Flynn shooting a German Shepherd that had mauled his cat to death. This would be Deputy Chief Flynn's cat and not the German Shepherd's cat. Reports indicate that he hunted down and then shot the animal before returning home. One witness followed him back to his residence and called law enforcement. Now, there's accusations of, political influence on the charges and all that. So it's a good article to read. Go to the show notes, which you can find at gunrightsintexas.com/028, and follow the link to the article. However, we do have more that we want to touch on, so I want to move on. And this story comes to us out of what is essentially my backyard. Now, you may remember that we have had a guest on. I believe we've had him on this podcast. I know we've had him on the Open Carry Report, or not. I think we had him on this podcast when it was the Open Carry Report, and I know I've had him on the Pro Gun podcast, and that guest would be James Franklin. Well, James Franklin lives in Midland, and Midland's within an hour's drive time from where I'm at. So, like I said, this story's in my backyard, and it hits close to home for James Franklin. And James Franklin is he's a member of Come and Take It, Texas. So There we are showing our open carry roots again, with our former guest and all that. However, in Midland, a police impersonator discovered that law enforcement officers take a very dim view when you impersonate an officer to an officer during a road rage incident. And I use the term road rage incident very loosely because, well, the road rage incident happened. It happened regarding the actual officer cutting off the law enforcement officer impersonator in the parking lot of a burger joint. Now, the police impersonator, he was arrested and jailed on a $25,000 bond. In Texas, impersonating a police officer is a third-degree felony. So this guy's probably going to go away for a while. And our final story in the news section comes to us from an out-of-state source, but a lot of people sent this story to the Open Carry Report, and enough people sent it in that I felt, well, I'm still going to cover it so people realize I do still pay attention to the old email address. However, in Oregon, a man was open carrying a handgun when he was approached by an armed suspect and relieved of his handgun at gunpoint. This particular article is a very rare example of where the act of open carry leads to someone being targeted for criminal activity. Now, this incident also shows that open carry is not a magic talisman and that anyone carrying in any manner, open or concealed, must maintain their situational awareness, which in this case could have prevented the crime altogether. Sorry about breathing into the microphone. I'm trying to keep from sneezing. I'm still getting over the bug that had me messed up 2 weeks ago on the last episode. Between that and rebranding the podcast, I missed a week. So let's just discuss the situational awareness thing. You see, that has been one of the sore points between myself and Open Carry Texas is they did a video PSA and I kind of mentioned, well, the woman in the video could have benefited more from situational awareness than open carry. And you would not believe the response I got from Open Carry Texas and supporters of Open Carry Texas. A lot of people email me, I'm a member of Open Carry Texas, and I do not appreciate you telling us that our video PSA is bunk. Or they didn't use the term bunk, they used several expletives. But it's true. Situational awareness is probably the best tool that anybody can have. It doesn't matter if you're open carrying, concealed carrying, or not carrying. Situational awareness can help you avoid being a victim. It can help you prevent a crime from ever happening just by allowing you to place yourself elsewhere when you see something odd. However, the thing is, open carry is not a magic talisman, and situational awareness isn't a magic talisman, but situational awareness is going to be far more effective at preventing a criminal act than open carry, simply because a criminal is going to either move on or wait for the open carrier to move on when they see somebody open carrying. It doesn't prevent the crime, it just delays the crime. And the same can be said for situational awareness, but the difference between situational awareness is when you're aware of your situation, you see something out of place, you have the option of calling the police and alerting them to it. If you're not aware of the situation and you're open carrying, your weapon is not going to just magically make your cell phone dial the police and report, hey, there's something suspicious going on here. We need to get an officer out here to check it out. And that's why I don't buy into the propaganda from either side. You see a lot of people in the open carry movement, war garble, open carry, less crime. And you'll see other people, war garble, open carry, more crime. In the end, it really doesn't make a difference. What does make a difference is the criminals thinking, I could die if I do that. Maybe I need to do something different. Or maybe I could get seriously injured if I do that. Perhaps I should do something different. In situational awareness, the potential victim says, hey, I may be in a bad place. I need to do something else. They move on and either the crime happens or the criminal thinks, well, there goes my opportunity. I'll just mosey on down the street and look for somebody else. I'm not a big fan of saying something will prevent crime, but situational awareness has a better chance of preventing crime than open carry. Open carry is a good tool for making a threat move on, but at the same time, it could have you targeted for criminal acts yourself. It's rare, but it happens. Now, with that said, I'm going to I'd like to say thank you to a few people in each episode. And on this episode, I want to thank the listeners, and I want to say, please help me out here. You see, I need your help to say thank you to 3 very important and often underappreciated people in the gun rights movement here in Texas. So here's what I need you to do. I need you to call 409-292-6736 and leave a voicemail saying something. And the voicemail, when you get to it, it may take a few rings, but it'll eventually go to voicemail. And when it does, I need you to leave a message saying something along the lines of, I am, and your first name, from, and, say your county or your city. And I want to let Alice Tripp, Tara Micah, and Charles Cotton know that I am grateful for everything they have done for gun rights in Texas, and I will support their efforts in the future. So please, call the number, say thank you to Alice Tripp, which is the Texas State Rifle Association's legislative director. Say thank you to Tara Micah, who just happens to be the NRA representative for Texas. And say thank you to Charles Cotton, who is involved with both of them. He's a member of the board of directors for the NRA. He runs the Texas CHL Forum, and he is very involved in Texas politics. Say thank you to those 3 and let them know they can count on your support. In the last week, I've had precisely 1 person respond from where I've done it where I've put a request into the forum, but the forum I refer to is the Texas CHL Forum that Charles Cotton runs. However, I kind of put it in the wrong spot. I was on sinus medicine and my head was stuffy. I wasn't thinking straight when I put it up, and I put it in the wrong subforum, so it may not have got all the exposure it should have. But once I have enough people do that, I will take those phone calls, the voicemails, and I will add them to an episode and forward it to Charles and ask that he share it with Tara Micah and Alice Tripp. Now, we're getting real close to the sign-off music, and before I go to it, I want to say that after the sign-off music, there's going to be a segment on the very basics of gun ownership in Texas. Now, this is intended to be a service to new, potential, and/or future gun owners. Future topics may be things such as what's required to legally own a gun in Texas, or how to get your concealed handgun license in Texas, and it may be other things. This time, it's going to be the 4 rules of gun safety. Now, if you don't want to hear about the very basics, once you hear the ending music, go ahead and stop the podcast and you don't have to listen to it, which is one reason it's being stuck on at the end, is so that our more experienced listeners don't have to listen to something that is going to possibly bore them to tears. While at the same time, it lets us help out somebody that they may not have any clue what they're doing and they're nervous about getting involved. But basically, the New to Guns and Gun Rights in Texas segment is going to happen after the music, and I think it's a service we need to provide on this podcast and others. Now, with that said, let's just go ahead and hit the music. Thank you for listening to the Gun Rights in Texas podcast. Please leave a review on iTunes or send feedback to the host. Your input will be used to improve the show. Stay safe and please carry responsibly. All right, then. We are set. We're good to go. And we're kicking off the basics and beginner segment with the 4 rules of gun safety. I figured, well, if we're going to start something about the basics, the first episode needs to be the very most basic thing that we can teach any gun owner. So let's take a look at the 4 rules of gun safety. Rule number 1, all guns are always loaded. Now, this doesn't mean you keep all of the guns loaded all the time. No, this means you always treat a gun like it's loaded. It does not matter if you know for a fact that gun is unloaded. You still treat it like it's loaded. Now then, rule number 2, never let the muzzle cover anything you are not willing to destroy. In my opinion, this is the one rule that will prevent you from shooting somebody that you don't intend to shoot, or shooting something you don't intend to shoot. All of these rules require you violate every one of them in order to in order to accidentally shoot and destroy or injure something or someone you don't want to. However, rules 1 and 2 are really the ones that are the most effective. If you treat a firearm like it's loaded every time you pick it up, you know for a fact that you're not going to destroy or injure something you don't want to. If you don't ever point at anything you don't want to destroy or injure, then the weapon will not destroy or injure something. Rule number 3 is you keep your finger off the trigger until you're on target and you're ready to fire. Basically, if you are not intending to shoot, keep your booger hook off the bang switch. Or if you're on a 1911, the bang button. Basically, guns don't shoot themselves if they're properly maintained and they're quality made weapons. And even an improperly maintained firearm should not discharge itself. Modern firearms are made to standards that are just unbelievable. The odds of a modern firearm discharging accidentally or negligently are very slim. And I include negligent there because if I didn't, I would have to say practically non-existent. The odds of a modern firearm discharging on its own are practically non-existent. So basically, it's not going to go bang unless something presses the bang switch or the bang button. And finally, rule 4 is be sure of your target and everything beyond it. Now, some people may say, well, as long as you're certain that you're shooting at your target, you're good. No. Let's say your brand new SUV is parked behind your target. Are you sure you want to shoot your target with that vehicle parked behind it? That's why you want to be sure of everything behind your target, because there may be something you don't want to destroy behind it. So be sure of your target and everything behind it. With that said, thank you for listening, stay safe, and carry responsibly.